Okay, so our next panel is how to adapt go-to-market models from the US to Europe. So this is really the bread and butter of the job, I think, for many of you in this room. And we have a very experienced panel to talk about it. So just to start off, we have Johan Butting, Anoop Khera, and Olivier Sabella. A little bit on each person's background. Johan is SVP at Slack and formerly VP of EMEA at Slack and VP of EMEA at Dropbox. Also, Johan and I worked together many moons ago in Google, more than a decade ago. Anoop is head of international at Attentive, which is a New York-based high-growth company that Frontline's an investor in, actually. And before, I think, was at ExactTarget in senior sales roles, also at Salesforce. And then Olivier is a VP at LinkedIn and has also been a VP at ServiceSource. And I think you were, was it SAP as well? Right. So we've got a lot of sales experience in here and also GM experience. Maybe to start off, because Johan was head of EMEA at two very well-known SaaS companies, Dropbox and Slack. Could you just say a little bit about how you made a fast start in those roles?
Yes, but before I do that, I need to just say a couple of sentences on the previous topic. And the main point is never waste a crisis. Yeah, I really think that in the current environment, all our companies, and yes, also all our EMEA organizations have some tremendous opportunities, and I would really focus on this. Yes, valuations go up and down, Stephen already said that, but you now have a chance to hire tremendous talent because it becomes available on the market. It's no longer that hardly fought for. You have the chance to not spend 80% of your day on interviewing and onboarding. You can actually spend time on customers, you can spend time on processes, on fixing all those things that you are annoyed about since 3 years and you never got around to fix. And if you build the business, if you build the team, and if you deliver value to your customers, you will come out of this way, way stronger than those who don't. And it is a fantastic opportunity. So I just want to say that, and I think that is true regardless of whether you sit at headquarters or in Europe. It really applies to all of us. So anyway.
You'd make a great politician. Never answer the question asked. Answer the question you want to
We
want
were
answered.
both working at Google. If anything, that's what we learned.
Yeah. So fast start. Fast start, Johan.
I think the most important thing is figure out where you focus. In both cases, Dropbox and Slack, for me, that was marketing. Yeah, the expectation was very clearly that when I arrived in Europe, hey, I would build the sales team, etc., etc. And I quickly saw that that is not the main lever. The companies I was working for had been on a typical product-led growth journey, which means the initial growth momentum came from word of mouth, the second came from marketing, and only the third came from sales. And it was highly counterintuitive to open the European business and start with the third, while we were arguably still in the first. So focus on understanding, like, word of mouth and product-driven growth doesn't happen totally on its own either. Yeah. So where did we need to support that process, both sort of in Europe across our key markets, and it is different market by market. That's important to understand. And then what did we need to do on the marketing side, while also, of course, delivering on the sales side, because that was the expectation that came from headquarters. So very important also to reset that expectation at headquarters, to go back and say, yeah, you hired me because you want to build the sales team, but I'm telling you, that's not like the number one priority, and here is why. Understand the funnel, build the metrics, extremely important. From what is your TAM, how much of your TAM is visiting your website every day, how are they converting, do that by country, how they're converting for sign up, how are they converting to active customers. And once you have that understanding and you build the marketing levers to drive it, for me, that was in both cases how I drove fast success. And
well, let's talk about marketing then. Anoop, maybe if you have any thoughts on that. What we've found in our research is that It's very common for otherwise extremely successful US companies to only hire their first marketer after a year or so, and usually that person is fairly junior. So I would say US companies underinvest in marketing. What's your view? I mean, Johan's saying it's more important than sales.
I think it's really, really important to have marketing in early in region. I think we've all been there. If you haven't, I definitely have, where they're like, oh, it's all coming from the US, and they pick a venue which you just cannot get to by public transport, or it's the wrong restaurant, and it's just a bit of a nightmare. So I think early on, yes, you have to build GTM teams out, but trying to get someone in within the first 6 months, I think it's critical. I'm quite in a fortunate position where, I kind of banged that drum, even though it wasn't part of the original headcount plan for this year, to say, look, we need marketing. Here's why. And I had the kind of the backup of my CMO. Going back to what was said earlier, build relationships. I report in this role to my CRO. The exec team's all based out of New York, and actually they're all remote now. So we've got people on the West Coast and the East Coast, which is a nightmare, especially for calls during the day. But build those relationships, make your business case, and marketing is going to be something I've managed to get, but I think it's really, really important because they're going to be the team that will help you get the budget for the events you want. They're going to be the team that's going to help you get those customer case studies, because they're going to be like really, really important in order to be able to show that your product can do what it needs to do in market as well.
And what about, just to broaden the question a little bit, to what functions should be the first functions to start in EMEA, and is there a natural sequence of functions? And anybody can hop in here. I mean, if marketing should be first before sales,
maybe I'll just finish up. I don't think I'd get marketing approved before salespeople. Just going to throw that out there. Obviously, I think you have to hire GTM as part of that. So again, it also depends on your, whether you're Series B or below, or how much funding you've got. Because in an ideal world, we'd all say, yes, we want inbound SDRs, outbound AEs, enterprise AEs. But ideally, I think where I've been successful, or kind of my learnings from that, would be, look, get your basic core components in, and then try and look at 2 or 3 roles outside of GTM. And for me, that's kind of been marketing as one. Sales ops is another huge one for me personally. Our sales ops are on the West Coast, right? So come 5 p.m., they're coming in, which is really, really difficult, especially when you want to kind of work out TAM, SOM, kind of build account patches and comp.
And also to that point of knowing the metrics that matter in an organization and how the whole business is going to be benchmarked and judged. Like sales ops is often where it's at. And if you have if you hire somebody locally here, it can't be some junior person. It has to be a heavyweight. Otherwise, you're a cork in the ocean.
Agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say look at what made the company successful in the US and follow the same sequence. If marketing came before sales in the US, probably you should do the same here. And I would totally echo what Stephen just said. Sales ops and recruiting have to be your first 2 supporting hires, and they are super, super critical.
Olivier, maybe I'll go over to you on a kind of broad question about what do you copy and what do you reinvent in Europe?
When I think about my role, can people hear me, by the way? Is it good? All right, great. When I think about my role, 80% of what I do is to execute the global strategy, right? And 20% would be what is specific to our region. And so, for instance, at LinkedIn, the global strategy is very much about upsell and cross-sell. What would be very specific to the region would be new customer acquisition, because in the US it's fully penetrated. It's not the case here. If we think about the execution of the global strategy, I guess there's the what and there's the how. So the what is being decided by HQ. Obviously, we want to give the right input, right? But that's what they do. And really, my job is on the how. But that's where the challenge is, because a lot of things that we get are designed for the US market. And I would say often there is this view that we have to be consistent, right? But the reality is consistency of execution can sometimes drive inconsistency of result, of experience, whether it's employees, whether it's customers. So I think the critical part of my role is being the expert of the region and working with people who are experts of the region is to, I would say, shape that how. So we're going to have consistency of experience, we're going to have consistency of results, but often it's going to be inconsistent when you think about the execution. It's not going to be the US model. And so I think earlier on, people were talking about the amount of time they spend with the HQ. I would spend a lot of time, and people in my team would spend a lot of time just on that education piece.
And to get very specific here, the sales deck at the stage around Series C, Series D, when a US company that's been successful in the US has a repeatable go-to-market model expands to Europe, there's a repeatable model, and there's usually a sales deck, and it's sent to you in PDF formats that you can't change or whatever. You sort of change some fonts and you change some spellings, but at what point do you decide that you need to reinvent that? You need to do your own sales deck with your own narrative versus sort of copying it? Maybe you two guys, because you were there at the start.
Yeah, so I think that's a common one that comes up all the time. So I think, Stephen, you referred to this as well at one point around success and amnesia, right? So when HQ first started, right, they did whatever they needed to do to get the product off the ground, like adapt really quickly in order to win deals. And then now they've got this motion, and this motion is working, it's starting to ramp revenue, and they're like, okay, this is it. And now, by the way, we've got 7 more use cases and 4 more products. So going back, keep it simple for me is like, don't try and boil the ocean. But going back to that sales deck, if I look at the fundamental difference that I have to explain to my C-suite is, in the US, it's not a case of why attentive, right? It's like, sorry, the example there is it's not why attentive, it's like why now and why should I do it? Whereas with us, we have to go back one step further and before that to educate the market on why they actually need our product before we get to why attentive and why now. So I think looking at that, obviously the standard ones are going to be around the kind of localization to taking out the Z's and changing for S's, but I think you have to adapt that, right? I think you have to be able to have that relationship where you can kind of say, look, this is what you've kind of hired me for, right? Like, and if you've got a good leadership team, they'll be open to that because they've hired you for the skill set that you have. But yeah, like I came on board and there was a 95 slide deck, right, for the first call. That's like death by PowerPoint. If this is being filmed, don't pass this out because our CEO is very fond of the deck. But that being said, he's really, really open as well. And that's the beautiful part there. And empowering me to do my job. And it's about how the slight nuances I can. You don't want to go completely off track, but don't be afraid to make the changes. Because back to your point, after the CRO, the VP EMEA is the most at-risk title. So it's your neck on the line. So be prepared to back your decisions.
Yeah, I would say change it if it's not working. Now that seems rather simple. I think it's really important in our role or in the EMEA leadership role that you spend a lot of time with customers. I think you explained very well all the meetings you are in, etc. Get rid of all of them. Yeah, if you don't spend 30% of your time with your customers, you will have a very hard time being successful in your role. And that is where your ultimate pride of existence comes from. And that makes it also quite easy to change the deck. Because if you once go home and explain the chief revenue officer, the head of marketing, the CEO, what a meeting looks like with that deck in Frankfurt, you usually have the arguments you need. And if they are extremely stubborn and they don't get it, bring them to Frankfurt and have them present. Usually that fixes the situation.
Just to add to your point there, I think I've got a game for everyone to play this week. I play it every week in my diary, and it's like, how many meetings can I cancel that are internal, right? Like, if you can genuinely get the update by not being in that meeting, then don't be there, right? Like, spend the time, and I kind of think as you're building a new region, on the things that actually move the needle. And to your point, whether that's being in a prospect meeting or meeting a customer or spending time with a team so you can understand in your region what's working, what's not working, and kind of be that kind of communication back to HQ. I think that's really important.
this is sort of an unplanned question, but we have a Frenchman and a German and an Englishman and an Irishman. It's like the start of a joke. But anyway, we have a Frenchman and a German on the panel. They're two countries that are sort of notoriously difficult for US companies to expand into, to the point where I've now seen it being more common that a company will be selling into Finnish or Icelandic customers before they actually make an attempt at France or Germany. Maybe Johan, how do you crack Germany? In like 3 sentences.
So, Germany is easier than France, and I have a French grandmother. It's the script that you have for Northwestern Europe, i.e. Scandinavia, Benelux, and UK, fundamentally also works in Germany. German buyers are more technical, they are more detail obsessed, so you need to be able to connect on that level. And Germans do think about different topics. So a local marketing that connects to local themes and makes you locally relevant is extremely important. And that is why also doesn't have to sit in Germany, but a team of Germans is very important because they will do a better job. But you do not have to fundamentally change the playbook, in my opinion.
And then you said in your experience, Germany's easier than France. I acknowledge, by the way, Olivier, that you actually have spent most of your career not in France. You were trying to escape France. But do you have any comments on France?
Sure, I do. Yeah, so France went extraordinarily badly for us, so badly that I actually decided for the last year and a half to be my French country manager because I just wanted to speak to French customers. And in my opinion, France is a more innovative country than Germany. Yeah, think about Minitel, Carte Bleue, Tour d'Eiffel, the average Citroën car, all highly innovative things. Try to navigate Charles de Gaulle, it's so innovative you can't. Yeah, but it is a country where it is it's much more important to be local. Yeah, so my sentence, you need a German team, but it can sit in Dublin, London, or somewhere. I would never say that for France. It has to sit in France. France is so centralized around Paris. Everybody is talking to everybody. They are still meeting for lunch. And the average CIO in France is actually older than me, while everywhere else they are a lot younger. Yeah, and that also means they are more conservative at this point in time. I think a generalization change will happen.
Yeah, very interesting. And what I would say is, certainly for US organization, UK and Ireland feel very, very close. And even from a cultural standpoint, much closer. And I think that's where the fear really comes from. And when we're talking about executing a global strategy, that's usually when you go to that side of Europe, the continental Europe side, that we have the biggest challenges to explain why things would be different. And I'm going to take an example which is actually not a sales one, but certainly diversity and inclusion is a big topic in many organizations, and it's one in LinkedIn. And I mean, we started a number of years ago with gender, and now we are on underrepresented racial groups. And great to meet you. So, and if you think about this, right, you have let's say a US, UK, Brazil model where minorities, right, minority groups are actually a fabric of those societies. If you move to Germany or if you move to France, actually it's kind of the opposite. Minorities are seen as undermining a Republican value system that is supposed to transcend differences, right? Because of history, right? I mean, I'd say, from a certainly mindset standpoint or at government standpoint, right? So for instance, in the US, we would have an underrepresented group for blacks, right? We've got the same in the UK. If you try to set up something like this in France, you're going to get a huge negative reaction, right? Because that goes against that system. So, I think back to the role that we have, I think the role of really educating, trying to drive what I could call that globally minded localist mindset is important and is critical to the success of our roles.
Well, one thing that I noticed, which is some overlap when I was at Twitter, is freedom of speech is obviously a hot topic. It's come up a lot with Elon Musk's recent attempt to acquire the company. But a sort of a mismatch that always happened between the US and non-US employees at Twitter was the relative importance of freedom of speech, because freedom of speech, of course, is enshrined in the US Constitution in a way that it's simply not in almost any other country around the world. There's all sorts of laws against hate speech in many European countries, the kind of laws that would never be passable in the US. And I remember it always stuck in my mind as being this sort of fundamental disconnect where if 80% of the employees of a company are American, they will make certain assumptions about the world that may or may not be true. And so I think encouraging executives to spend a bit of time outside the US is always a good idea, but also making sure that some of the executives in Europe get to not just visit for a week or so, but maybe spend longer. I think, Johan, you might have spent a few months, did you, at headquarters?
I had the advantage, I lived in the States for a long time, but then when I onboarded at Dropbox, I went back for 4 months and actually led a sales team, and the larger part of the sales team over in the States, which was great because I could prove that I could sell in the States. And so when Europe initially was difficult, it was not a question, can Johan sell? It was really about, okay, does the model work? I would like to sort of also give a slightly sort of balancing thought. I think as the EMEA leader, you are not only the champion of EMEA in headquarters, it's equally important that you are the champion of headquarters in EMEA. And I think it's really, really important that you do not forget that. Fundamentally, people are pretty similar. Yeah, we all like to eat, we like to sleep, we like to make money, etc., etc. Yeah, so from that perspective, there's a high chance that what works in the US is also working in Europe with some minor adaptations. And I think as EMEA leaders, it is our job to at times also sort of push back and do so in a smart and explaining the why manner, why it's actually not so horrible to take something from the US, bring here and adopt it. It is actually a smart way to do it, and it usually works if you go about it the right way. And so if I see too much of a whinginess come up, I don't know if you paraphrase Robbie's thoughts here. I don't know what the term was. I'm usually pushing back and I'm saying, guys, why do you want to make your life so hard? It's, after all, we are just selling to humans and they are kind of the same. So let's not forget that.
If I can just build up on this, right? When I was talking about that narrative of globally minded localists, this is one that I find works really well because it actually works both ways. I think for us in the region, it's about really understanding the global strategy. And to your point, being able to talk to our teams about that and why we're doing certain things and why we're not doing others. And I think for HQ, it's about the localist piece and showing to them the value of being embedded into the local markets. And I think to me, when using that narrative, demonstrate that it's not like we're different, and which often creates the wrong reactions, but it's like we all have to learn about each other and from each other's.
Yeah, and I think also make it your job to co-lead globally. Yeah, you will really get credibility in the organization if you do something with your org that moves the org globally forward. And you will be surprised how many opportunities you have to do that. Yeah, I always thought our erstwhile boss, whom I think many in the room know, John Hurley, he did a good job of that. He was very strategic in figuring out the couple of areas where he thought he could move something globally. Then he made great fanfare about it, and it worked. Yeah, so I think look for those opportunities. That usually helps as well.
And maybe just to finish out on a similar theme to something that came up in the previous panel, ensuring ongoing executive buy-in at headquarters. Can you get down to some specifics and tactics that you have employed? What have you done to ensure that in your job?
Maybe I'll go, Stephen. Yeah, look, I think at the moment your company's decided to commit into Europe or APAC. I think at that point, it's great, you've got executive buy-in, but I kind of always, front of mind for me is how do I keep it? Like, your exec team are busy, right? There's a million ideas or people asking for budget, and it's down to us to be able to keep that at the forefront. Generally, what I've done over the years is just tie it into kind of company OKRs, right? So if international is part of that, then how do I tie in my goals that's important to the company's overarching goals at some point in the company OKR? And then down to even departmentals, I think we mentioned around product. Okay, can we do some stuff in different languages and tie it into one of their goals? Or if it's around HR and talent retention, just to make sure we're at the front of mind. I think that's definitely one way. I think one of the other things that I tend to do is ensure those relationships with different C-suite members. Like, it's down to me to put time in their diaries, right? I kind of look at it as like, it's a marriage, right? Like, they've decided we're married now. Right? And it's going to take work from both sides. By the way, I'm not sound like I'm talking from experience, but it takes both us to make that work. Admittedly, just to be honest, it's going to take more from my side than their side. And I'm okay with that, but I'm just aware of that. And because I'm aware of that, that's me putting in regular one-to-ones. That's me putting stuff, international meetings in the all hands. That's me setting stuff and saying this should be part of an OKR. And likewise, sitting with sales ops and saying, oh, well, actually, these targets don't kind of work, right? And say, because you're forgetting that we need time to ramp. We need to work out our product offering and product market fit in this region and what use cases kind of really, really resonate. So they're just a few of the things that I've done.
Yeah, I think the most important thing probably was to always be clear on what we want to achieve and what headquarters is getting from us. And we always went in and we said, look, we are here because we lift the amount of revenue you get in Europe from 10 to 30% of global revenue. Yeah, and depending on what kind of company you are, it may be more in the high 30s if you're SMB, probably mid 20s if you're very enterprise, but be clear on that. Put a stake in the ground and say, I'll get you there in the next 4 years. And then jointly track progress and explain what is happening and explain that in simple words. That is why the sales ops role is so important. Yeah, you back it up with the numbers, but you have a simple narrative. You go over, you invite them to come here, 30% of them come, hence you go over frequently, you take your deck with you and you explain. And then you find those areas where you can really make a difference and help globally. And for me, that has always been cross-functional collaboration. Cross-functional collaboration is way easier in the region because we all have the same pain and less ego gets in the way. So I have always been able to set the blueprint for cross-functional collaboration in the region at a point in time where on a global level they were still figuring out how to work together. And find 2-3 other areas like that, maybe an engineering area where you're specifically strong, etc. And those things together, I think then you're in a good shape.
I think just to add one more part on that, it's also important for us to kind of guide that exec team, right? Example and point being that obviously we're launching in the UK and Australia and we're starting to get really good traction. And I was recently in the US and I was speaking to my CEO and he's like, Anoop, this is great. We've got loads of customers. This is fantastic. And that was it. Went to had some dinner and got an email at 12 o'clock and it's like, right, I've decided to expand into 12 more countries. We need to do LATAM. And I was like, wow. Okay. It's like, look, we haven't even got the operation off the ground now. So there's an element of like, let's just get this working well, learn from it and move down. So just as well as accelerating is like, don't be afraid in Mike's moment to say, look, great, get it. Love the enthusiasm, but there's a risk. And especially in this current climate with what's going on, I think it's now about how do we operate really efficiently? How do we work well with the best we've got? Because there's always that risk of like, if we grow too quick, then that's not always the best thing to do as well. So get it done, understand what works, then learn and refine and move.
We did a survey a couple of years ago of dozens of high growth US companies, about half of which subsequently went public. So these were really the top end of companies. And we asked structured questions about their growth and what markets they went into and all that. But there was one free text question that we asked at the end, which was, if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently? And people could have written anything. And it was always for the head of international. It was usually somebody at headquarters who was responsible for the initial expansion. And about half of companies, unprompted, said, we tried to grow too fast, which was certainly not obvious to me at the time, because these were all exceptionally high growth companies. These were hyper growth companies. And when we dug into that a little bit more, it was that they tried to expand into too many countries and segments with sometimes multiple products at the same time. The kind of movement that they would never have tried in the US, they'd gradually built up to that over 5 or 6 or 7 years. And so anyway, that was always stuck in my mind, that even the fastest growing companies in the world try to grow too fast, and many fail. Any questions from the audience to the panel? Yep.
Everyone talks about marketing being a key investment. I think fundamentally in SaaS businesses, marketing is kind of underinvested in, even in the US. So, you know, even from some of the stuff you guys have released, everyone has a landing team, it's account executives, you build into it. Everyone says get the marketing. How have you guys approached getting the budget for that? You know, we're doing the same from the US. Marketing's not even a conversation. It's like, get the account executives, get them in, get them selling, you know. We can do the marketing from the US. Just curious how, if you've had success getting marketing and how you've gone about that. Because Johan, your thing was word of mouth, marketing, and account executives. Most firms do account executives, maybe word of mouth and then marketing.
Understand something about marketing is probably the answer. So at Dropbox we had the advantage that Robbie sits there, we were the first 2 employees in EMEA, and we both come from Google, and we had a 6-person lending team, of which 4 were from Google and had at some point in time sold AdWords. The paid marketing know-how in Dropbox in the early years sat in Europe, which allowed us to hijack the global SEM budget. That helps. But that is not necessarily reproducible. But the bigger point is know what you are doing, yeah? And if necessary, you early on, when you hire these, you make these very first hires, you can hire a few people which have profiles that are not according to the textbook. And so you call it a salesperson, but it's actually a marketing person. Well, okay, you carry a bit more quota, but ultimately it's worth the investment. Yeah? And that is something we have regularly done. That is how we solved the problem at Slack. We had 5 people who did nothing but marketing, but were salespeople on paper. I think that's more. And then look at the numbers. If you explain the numbers properly, everybody will see how important it is.
I wasn't at LinkedIn at early stage, but my former boss, Pierre Berlin, who's at the back, was there, and I'll steal his word, right? I remember what he shared with me. At the time I was considering going into early stage organization. He said 2 things are going to be really important for marketing. Number 1 is when you get your first marketing person, make sure that they report to the VP of marketing, not to one of their own reports, because you're going to need to get that traction, because that person's going to have to do everything, even if they are specialized into one area. And the other thing he said, and by the way, you can keep me honest, Pierre, is you're not going to have a great deal of budget, so you have to spend it very smartly. And what works really, really well, especially in the enterprise space, is customer references and PR. It's a cheap way to get your message across and to have a significant impact. So, don't know if you want to add anything, Pierre, but...
Just from my bit on that would be just to say, well, what I've just managed to be able to do is find someone in our US marketing function that reports to the CMO. I brought her over to the UK. She loved it. She sees the potential. There's also the fact that this would improve her career personally, because she would have like not just one aspect of marketing is going to be field demand generation and so on. And kind of just make sure, so in a way, she was going to be supporting the UK anyway. I've just got her to kind of move country in effect. And then in addition, being able to get a cheaper marketing headcount to work underneath her. So to kind of just the best of both, really. Someone that knows the business really well, career opportunities, but kind of get them in region with someone that knows the region.
I think what you just said was really, really important. PR and customer stories are a good way of doing it. And if you can get your CEO over to do a press tour in Europe, he'll very quickly, or she'll very quickly understand how much marketing is underinvested.
And I think the ultimate leadership compliment for Pierre being quoted back by a direct report from 10 years ago, that's fantastic. Okay, we're gonna wrap up with this panel and take a very short break. So think 3 to 5.